Hi there, I'm Amanda Cromhote from Truth. Welcome to the Blind Loyalty Challenge. We interview world experts in loyalty blindly. We're hoping to create insight, spontaneity, and a lot of fun through the challenge. The challenge is about promoting the blind loyalty trust, and my book called Blind Loyalty, 101 Loyalty Concepts Radically Simplified. All profits from the book go towards the trust. We hope you enjoy the Blind Loyalty Challenge. So again, we are here on the Blind Loyalty Challenge, and next to me is Erin Dauphinee, Chief Marketing Officer of the Wise Marketeer Group. Needs absolutely no introduction, but Erin, welcome to the Blind Loyalty Challenge.
Hi, thanks, Savannah. I appreciate you having me on today.
Yeah, I'm really excited. You're no stranger to a podcast or webinar, so I think this is going to be super easy for you. So let's see if we can make it a little bit tricky.
Don't go too tricky. I've had a tough
So,
one already. It'll be all right.
so the first question, so in chapter 72, I actually quote the Wise Marketeer in retail beauty loyalty programs. So in your opinion, which retail industry do you think is most receptive, most responsive to loyalty?
So the retail obviously spans a number of spectrums in terms of how you define it. And I think that's sometimes part of the issue with our industry is as we get into these subsegments and we don't realize actually retail is anytime a customer is coming into a particular place or even in the e-commerce coming online to make a purchase and exchange of some sort. And so with that in mind, I mean, the one that's really coming into play for me, I mean, health and beauty is one that you mentioned of being a good from a specialty retailer perspective. I actually think that some of the clothing retail and apparel are doing well, particularly with the direct-to-consumer models that are coming into play. I think
Yeah.
that's really changed the way in which retail is thought of, and that's a bit of a hybrid, if you will, between e-commerce and brick and mortar. But the direct-to-consumers like the Nikes and the Adidas of the world, like I think of footwear as well, because I'm a bit of a runner, they've really come into play in terms of utilizing the information that they've been collecting on their consumer programs. One of the examples that I touted back when, and I did along with other colleagues at Bond Brand Loyalty when we were doing the loyalty report, was Nike and the Nike program in terms of the different types of interactions that they've created as experiences for the customers based upon the information they're using. And I always like using their West Hollywood store location example, where they've taken the information in a geofence around that particular location and said, here, let's collect all the data on all the people that we have in our profile and only keep the SKUs down to a SKU level, the color, the type, the fit, the exact product in the store that is going to service on a replenish
Wow.
or new products for that particular group set and make it very bespoke and customized to West Hollywood. The other part of that is West Hollywood, very hard to find parking. So you know what we should do? We should allow them to order in advance on a replenish, have a garage door open, they drive in, we hand them the actual product, and they drive back out of the store from a convenience and perspective. So utilizing information in a way that actually creates these experiences of ease and convenience and
Yeah.
savings of time in a retail environment that typically isn't that strong oftentimes in terms of the traditional loyalty mechanics that come into play from a program's perspective.
I love those. They should have a refreshment statement so they get their members to run in. It's a nice
Yeah, no, for
experience.
sure. I mean, it actually the New York store, if we keep on Nike as an example, the New York store has a fifth floor on top of four other floors, which is dedicated to the loyalty program users. And in instance in New York, if you're running during your lunch hour, you can order ahead, have all of your products in a locker, run into the store, do a quick try on, grab those that you want, those that you don't, you leave, and you literally walk out of the store because you've already paid online and app. You're not waiting in line. So I mean, they obviously can't replicate that in all the stores, but that is certainly as a marquee store, a certain way to literally run into the store and run out with the products that you need.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Wonderful. So my second question, if you had to name one thing, what is the most difficult thing about launching a loyalty program?
About launching the program. Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. So I come from a background of planning and analysis and the strategy side of the loyalty operations and the mechanics of it. And for us, it was always the getting the sponsor or the actual brand to be convinced that you should be on it. So I'm talking about a coalition perspective to some degree, but what I'm talking about is getting your estimates and the planning assumptions correct. Like that's the most challenging part because you go into the executive with this case that comes into play
Yeah.
and says, hey, we think we're going to get lifts and shifts of X and Y over a period, and we're going to get this big bump in year one, right? And then it's a question of, well, what about year two and year three? Oh, we're going to get, same types of step changes over the period. And the answer is no, it's more like a lawn curve actually, right? Like you get that big bump in the first year and go from there. And so I think one of the biggest challenges is making sure that the marketing communications and that initial foray is a realistic representation of what the consumer can expect on an ongoing basis, because we tend to overload the onboarding experience and the acquisition
Yeah.
side, and then we leave her off, and we don't have that same level of touch and interest in the customer to some degree, and that's just because the program's trying to get this incremental element of sales that's in play, and that's why you're putting the program in place. So I think, if I could sum it down into a quick sentence, the biggest challenge in initially launching a program is setting realistic expectations about what it is that you're going to have in terms of customer behavioral change, and then what's that change on an ongoing basis of what's realistic about it, and setting those guidelines early. And it often
Yeah.
starts with the initial assumptions that you put into your business plan.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Great. Love that answer. I often chat at workshops and so on when we're talking about loyalty. And I said the work starts after you've launched. Like it's hard enough to get to launch, but it's like an e-commerce store. You can't launch it and forget about it. It's every day of your life. Like you have to run it.
Yeah,
So
and for those on the strategy side and planning, like you kind of fingers crossed that you got your assumptions right, because it is a bit of art and science at the end of the day. And what you experience with one program, you will not experience with the other necessarily, at least completely accurately to 100%. There
yeah.
might be variations and shades and degrees of it, but otherwise sometimes holistically something completely other the way, because a macro impact has come into play. Gosh forbid
Yeah.
we talk about the pandemic again, but that was something that you just couldn't foresee, and so that certainly would have had impact on anyone who was launching a program in late 2019 or early 2020.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Okay, my last question. So chapter
Yeah.
84 of Blind Loyalty talks about data privacy. So
Okay.
do you think organizations are doing enough to make consumers feel comfortable with this?
I think that varies by which geography you're in and location you're in. I very much, if I think about Europe as kind of the torchbearer, and in Canada here we have strong
Mm.
privacy and always have had strong privacy legislation, and Europeans kind of came over the top and built it and went even further. And I do like that they pushed to the point where the customer was the center of the piece of legislation. I have the right to be forgotten, and you have to do something about that. I think some people think that it's a bit overbearing in terms of the economics that come into play, and that's maybe
Mm.
fair, but at the end of the day, that's around protecting the consumer and the ability to have choice and flexibility. And I think that's pretty savvy in terms of how that's structured. And I'm someone from the industry playing both sides of that coin, from a consumer side as well as what's the impact, to the businesses that have to operate in Europe. Then you flow through to the Wild Wild West, as I call it, just south of me in the United States, and it's still a opt-in, right? It's not, it's an opt-out
Opt out.
mentality. Yeah, opt-out mentality. And then just north of the border, you've got opt-in, and so you have to kind of, as a global operator, I think that's a big challenge. And so I think there's a mixed message here. Some are doing it very, very well, and that's a function of the legislation and the environments that they're operating in, and others are just not taking it to the forefront. Particularly if you're, I'll use the United States example. If you're only operating in the United States, the question would be, why should I? Until consumers start to give me a reason to do it. And fortunately, there are some states that are coming in with the legislation shortly that will start to help to protect consumers and their privacy. But as a flag bearer for the industry, Wise Marketing
Yeah.
Loyalty Academy, we always hone on the side of always protect the consumer first. I mean, that really is the one banner that we need to have as loyalty marketers, is to say we need to do better and be on the further right, if you will, in terms of right side of the proper side, or the correct side, if you will,
Yeah.
of privacy, and not try to dangle and walk that fine line. I don't think it's a wise decision for us.
It's so funny that you describe the US as the Wild Wide West, Wild Wild West, because when I first came to South Africa 20 years ago, I used to describe the data environment here as the absolute wild, wild west. And now it's completely tightened up and mirrors GDPR. So it's extremely structured and good for the consumer. But I never expected someone to describe the US as the wild, wild west. So
Yeah, in terms of privacy, that certainly is just be and it's changing. Like I think there's a positive here. Like I'm not trying to be demolishing in terms of that. That's
yeah.
just the reality is it hasn't caught up and there hasn't been enough push, but it's starting to sway. And what will be good, I think, for us as loyalty marketers is when all regions sort of get to that
Mm.
high level of standard of protecting the consumer. The reality is we're just not there, and I think those that are frustrated the most about it are those that are global operators because they
Yeah.
are operating in certain markets where their competitors don't need to adhere to those
Yeah.
things, and they need to because they take the higher road and they operate to that global standard.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. Great. Thank you, Erin.
For
Fantastic.
sure.
So, my last question is who
All
can
right.
I speak to next? That's the only predictable question in this interview.
Yeah, and I had a hard time coming up with this because there's just such a great depth of talent, and I'm going to be selfish and promote some Canadians if that's all right, because
Oh,
it's a
wonderful.
question for loyalty. And if you don't mind, I'm going to give you three, and you can pick and choose. Like here's my top three, or at least I shouldn't say top three because some people will get upset, but certainly top three that have had influence and that I respect and admire as colleagues and have grown up with in the loyalty industry over the years in Canada. The first is Jisun Han, who is actually at Cognitive Technologies right now. She's a chief strategy officer there. But what I love about Jisun is that we grew up at the Air Malls camp, pardon me, and she was then shipped off to Brazil to work with Roberto Schade down to do the DOTS Coalition Rewards program. She came back and led the financial institution, the Bank of Montreal, at Air Miles again here in Canada, and then has migrated on into a great role at Cognitive with Chief Strategy Officer. And they do focus a lot right now on AI enablement in terms of loyalty programs that are in place. The
Wonderful.
second, and I'll keep on the women trend because we do support women in loyalty 100% here at the Wise Marketer, is Megan O'Neill, who's a former colleague of mine at Bond Brand Loyalty. And she stepped in when I left the organization on the Bond report, the loyalty report, the largest consumer global study that's out there. It's the most longitudinal study that exists. I highly recommend it for everybody. And she stepped in, and I also grew up with her at previous organizations as well, including Air Miles. And so just a real, the depth and the quality and the astuteness of how she understands the marketplace and can take practical loyalty design principles and put them into place for brands is just amazing. So I speak highly of her. And then last but not least, rounding out the three is Matthew Seagram, who is a good friend of mine and colleague as well through many years, who started putting financial products, services, added value services onto loyalty programs. Then from his AMIA days with me, we moved into taking on a role to build out the Scene loyalty program, which is our theater program here, along with one of the major banks, Scotiabank, to now what is, I would say, the best and most effective coalition program that exists in Canada, particularly from a lifestyle business, and it includes our second largest grocer now as well too. So Matthew's pretty impressive, and then he's just recently taken a role to move to the second largest credit union, Meridian Bank, and he's the chief digital officer there. And so I'm just excited to see what he can do next to change the banking industry, just like he did in terms of retail and entertainment in Canada here.
Wow, amazing. Goodness. I feel like it's my birthday. I get 3 for 1 there.
Yeah, it's hard
Thanks,
to pick
Erin.
one, right? And even picking
No.
three was hard. There's a whole long list as well too, that follows up. So and
Well,
sort of
I'm going to selfishly take all three. I can't wait to speak
absolutely.
to just one of the three, let alone all three. So, Erin, you're an absolute superstar. Really interesting responses. I knew it would be. So, no surprises,
Well,
but thank you so, so much.
I appreciate it, Amanda. Thanks so much and be well.